A fun little prank that I've pulled is sort of doing all the branding and everything for a Final Fantasy podcast, but then actually sneaking in and making an Atlus Shin Megami Tensei podcast instead. It's a prank I've pulled on everyone, but especially myself, and it's gone over really well, I think, and so we're just going to keep that rolling, so... Welcome to Did It All for the Moogle, a very important podcast where we talk about very important topics like Shin Megami Tensei, especially Shin Megami Tensei V Vengeance. This is going to be the Shin Megami Tensei Power Hour. We're going to get into SMT V Vengeance, and then later on, Persona 3 Reload episode Aigis. Two very timely topics. Don't look at the calendar. Don't do that. Don't look at what year it is. I need to get these out of the way before I can move on to other important Atlus games like Metaphor Refantasio, which that's going to be... It'll be like I'm Ahab, and that's probably going to be like my white whale of a podcast. If you thought the Persona 3 episode was in-depth, I had to get books specially ordered for research for the Metaphor notes that I'm compiling. So you might see that in 2027. Who knows? Let's talk about SMT V Vengeance. I'm not going to go crazy here because I've played this game like 3 times, it feels like. So I just have some general notes about it, but I do want to talk about the sort of cyclical nature of the response to, I guess, more modern SMT games and how they're received by the people that pay attention to them. And I guess I struggle to call them fans, you know. This is just continuing my lack thereof relationship with the SMT fan base. The way that modern SMT is received is odd to me. And the way it usually goes is that the latest game is always the worst one, right? And the one before that is the best one ever. And in a way, this is a cycle that repeats, much like the True Goddess Metempsychosis. You saw this with SMT 4. It was released, and it was this disgrace to the franchise because it was kind of different than Nocturne, and it had this weird samurai aesthetic. And then SMT 4 Apocalypse came out, and it was too anime, and it was turning the main series into Persona, which is, the horror, can you imagine that? And then when that happened, base 4 looked incredible because, it was so hardcore, and you couldn't get out of that first dungeon, and all that kind of shit. And then a few years pass, and SMT 5 is out, and then people realize that Apocalypse had a less bullshit version of the smirk mechanic in 4, and so then, hey, that game was actually really good too. And it, streamlined some mechanics, and it was a good SMT game. And now people sort of package 4 and 4 Apocalypse together like they were going to in the first place as being a good duology, even though they're different games. Like, it's just a frustrating dynamic that I just come across. Whenever 5 came out, 5 was like, oh, this game killed my dog, it has no story, and Apocalypse is the best game in the series. You just see this happen over and over again. I'm sort of waiting for the video essays to pop up about how Soul Hackers 2 is actually, really, really good. I'm waiting for it. I might actually do it myself. Even though I have very mixed feelings on that game. The dungeons aren't very good. But that's beside the point. So, there's a weird discourse that happened post-release of SMT 5 Vengeance. And a lot of it is like revisionist history. So suddenly this release came out and it's saved the franchise. It turned a really shitty game that was SMT 5 into a good game, and now this game is the best SMT to ever happen. It turned a bad game into a good game, sort of like No Man's Sky. It had its turnaround, or like Cyberpunk fixed their game. Like, this is how people are talking. And let me remind you that it was not that long ago that people talked about SMT 5 as being a good game that was just simply held back by the Switch's really shit hardware. The main criticisms of the original release of 5 were the performance is bad because it's stuck on the Switch. The story's kind of threadbare, and the dungeon design is odd. And I want to kind of talk about why two of those sentiments aren't really true. Well, I guess 1.5, if we're being honest. Compared to most of the recent mainline entries, so that would be 4 and 4 Apocalypse, the original 5 does have much less exposition and character interaction after like the first couple hours. This doesn't actually mean that it's like lacking in narrative or that it has less of a story than those 3DS games. 4's slow start is actually a detriment to me. It doesn't really even get rolling until you get to Tokyo proper. But again, that's sort of beside the point. The original 5 was attempting to replicate the style, presentation, and narrative of SMT 3 Nocturne. And those early areas of Dot, which is the main gameplay area that you're in, evoke the sandy wastelands of Nocturne's Vortex world. And so both the narratives of 5 and 3, I know I'm throwing out a lot of numbers here, I apologize, but so 5 and 3, so SMT 5 and SMT 3 Nocturne, both those narratives are directly concerned with remaking the world in a chosen image, with Nocturne foregoing the usual chaos and law alignment system that the earlier games had, in favor of a character-presented reason system, which were essentially philosophies masquerading as personalities, and that's in the case of Nocturne. 5 also forgoes the traditional sort of alignment system, and it's sort of like a pick your favorite character, like ending alignment style, except for the true ending, but that's... Don't get me started on the true ending of 5. It's kind of bullshit. And so we also can't forget the player characters of either 3 or 4. So Nocturne's Demi-Fiend and 5's Nahobino. Both are hybrid humans forced to split and share their humanity in differing circumstances in order to survive this world of demons that they're suddenly thrust into. So you can see how 5 was echoing a lot of what 3 did. And 3 was the king of just setting this mood and tone. And that's really what it was trying to convey. 3 doesn't really have a start-to-finish narrative. There's the conception, you're kind of trying to find your teacher, you're running into all these different characters, they have their reasons, you're just sort of wandering around. There's the cult, you know. It's got all the trappings of, like, the early SMT, but it's also vague and, like, Lynchian. And I know that gets tossed around a lot by like film student kids, but it really is. And that's why it's the best one. If you're going to play an SMT, please play Nocturne. Please. I beg everyone. So the thing about mainline SMT games is that they don't really have great stories, right? They're immaculate at building specific character and setting and mood and theme, and using mythology and religion to build this world that you explore, and tying in a specific theme and message that they want to get across with a specific game. And it excels at that. But a start to finish narrative, you know, they're kind of all the same. The world's been destroyed. You, as whatever character you are, kind of get to decide the fate of the new world. That's really it. They're kind of all the same that way. There's either an actual goddess, or the world or Tokyo is a metaphor for the goddess. That kind of thing. It's, you know, you can read a lot into a lot of things, and that's what makes it fun, more open to interpretation. You can sort of fill in your own blanks, and that's what makes it fun. But the moment-to-moment story is, go here, talk to this guy. He's the chaos guy, so he wants to let the world get run over by demons. He might ask you to go kill the law guy. You go talk to the law guy. He tells you that the strength of law is going to be the thing that saves the world, and that usually means there needs to be a nuclear holocaust to cleanse the world, blah, 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 because it's God's will. You could either side with him and go back and kill the chaos guy, or you can kill him right there. It's to get you moving through the world and to figure it out, and to pick a path, a morality, a alignment system that you decide, and then that's going to dictate the ending of the game. That's really the bare bones aspect of the story. Nocturne and 5 excel at stripping a lot of that back and just sticking you in the desert and saying, off you go. Go explore. And you're going to run into some weird mannequins. The Lynchian old woman and boy in a wheelchair try to talk to you. You're collecting menorahs. You run into some radical skeletons that want to kill you. It's great, you know. What I think the original 5 got wrong was the setup. And it was at the same time too complicated, didn't quite explain itself, didn't matter, and also didn't have any balance between the human side and the dot underworld demon side. So this gave off the feeling at times like it was incomplete or half-baked, because in the early parts of the game, you're kind of bouncing between, oh, you're back in Tokyo as a human. Okay, now you need to go back into the underworld as the Nahobino. And it was almost gesturing at that half, I was going to say Half-Life, but half splitting your time, Persona-esque kind of thing. But at a certain point, that just isn't there. And so it feels like, hey, did they just not develop this? Because the Tokyo side just sort of gets abandoned completely. But I would argue that it was intentional. I would say that it was the purpose of it was to show more of humanity, to show what you have lost with the apocalypse. They just made the backstory far too complicated. It was really messy with the virtualization, the whole thing about what God did and the war. All that shit, all the backstory is really confusing and ends up not mattering at all in the grand scheme of things, because you spend the rest of your time in the underworld doing SMT stuff, and then that ends up not mattering whatsoever. You just sort of go on your way, fighting demons, recruiting demons, doing the usual shit, running into characters, and then you gotta pick your ending, and you go from there. So if anything was half-baked, I would say maybe the backstory of why, like, I don't know, they, like, gave a reason for why Tokyo exists, but it's like, you don't even... You didn't need that. And so I would also counter with, oh, they didn't properly develop that human side. I would counter with the Persona Awakening parody. Now, this is going to get into a little bit of spoilers for SMT 5, a specific part in SMT 5. It's a decent way part into the game, but it's not about an ending or anything. It's just a story event that happens. So, just fair warning, I guess. So, a good ways into the game, the setup is you're a high school student, and you've sort of become this half demon thing, the Nahobino. And demons have invaded the human side, and you fight your way through your school with some of your friends who can also control demons. It doesn't matter, don't worry about it. And one of your friends is being attacked by a demon, and it has the full setup and feels exactly like a moment in modern Persona games where that character is going to realize their inner strength or whatever and awaken to their own ability and fight back against the demon. It has the perfect setup for that, where like all their friends are standing around saying, no, you can fight this, you can fight back, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And rather than that happening, this girl gets eaten by the demon. And so I call this the Persona Awakening parody, because it sets up like it's going to happen, where she's going to awaken to like demon summoning powers or whatever, or like she has other abilities like one of the other characters does. But no, she's just a regular person that can't fight demons, and so she gets eaten in a very violent fashion. And so this is the game telling you, no, this is not a Persona game. We're not going to be splitting time between the daytime aspects and the demon fighting aspects. This is not a game where the power of friendship is going to save the day. This is where a girl's going to get eaten by that demon rather than self-actualizing. And it's fantastic. It's beautiful, because it turns what you're expecting on your head if you know both sides of this series. And it's also a big fuck you to people that are always like, oh, they're turning SMT into Persona. It's like, oh, you think we're turning it into Persona? Here you go. Here you go. I love it. It's beautiful. So I don't think that I think it was intentional, the way that they had this, the split between Daylife Tokyo and the demon world. It's just that there's no correct handoff for when it's like you're just now completely in the demon world. In the re-release here, SMT V Vengeance, there is an additional route where it's a separate, not a separate story, but just like another path along the same story. And in this scene, you think, okay, there's a new character here. You might think you can sort of make a choice here. You might think now, at the Persona Awakening, at the very least, oh, maybe we can save this girl. No, you can't save her. But because it's still important for a character's full arc, for the friend of that girl. So no, they don't even turn that on its head either. Because the way they set it up for that is even like furthers the parody, because instead of you getting knocked out, you can now wake up and fight the demon. You can defeat the demon, but I forget what happened. The girl, I think the girl loses her mind or something and still dies or something like that. But either way, it's like now you can team up with your friends, and it's like, oh yeah, the power of friendship is going to do this. You fight the demon, you kill the demon. It doesn't matter. She's gone anyway. So yeah, they're just like, no, screw you. You're not going to get the happy ending here in this scene. Yeah, the re-release is really good. I do think it's the game that it should have always been, not being stuck on the Switch, not being stuck with really bad pop-in, getting to play over 25 frames per second. There's a lot more demons, which there was already a shit ton in the original. I really enjoyed the Vengeance route. There's combat enhancements. Just they added demon passives, which are actually tuned properly and are not just broken like in Persona passives. So that's really fun. They added what do they call it? Magatsuhi rails to the overworld, which adds a little bit of environmental puzzling to get to certain areas, makes exploration really fun. Finding the goddamn Mimon that are hidden all over the place. Yeah, it's just really good. It's a really good re-release. I wish they would just release a finished game and have it be that, and then if they release any additional shit, just let me spend the $30-$40 to get that as an expansion, you know? But in this case, whatever. They've got my wallet. I should just give Atlus my bank account number at this point. Yeah. They've got my money. It does make me excited for future games, because it seems like they're not running out of ideas for combat, and it makes me very excited. There's still so much you can do with press turn. But speaking of paying for expansions, let's talk about Persona 3 Reload, episode Aigis. And again, I will keep this brief. So, I feel like people will bounce off of this DLC pretty hard. And that's because it has a very rigid structure with absolutely no flexibility. And it's completely combat focused. So the setup is this. You have your narrative setup, which is like, I don't know, maybe an hour. Then you've got 25 hours or so of dungeon crawling, depending on your difficulty. And then you've got maybe a couple more hours of narrative conclusion. So this is really just a dungeon crawling expansion. And that's not a surprise. That's what the original was. So, and I will touch on difficulty here because that was a sticking point in my P3 discussion. So, I was let down by the inability to flex into and out of the hardest difficulty in the base game, which was called Merciless. And so that's why I opted for the next highest difficulty in the base game. And that became far too easy very quickly. And I found the theurgy mechanic, which were basically like everybody's ultimate ability. I found that to be a mechanic that just completely broke the game. They recharged way too quickly. They did too much damage. You could just sort of turtle up, wait for your theurgy to charge, and then just blast away anything. I also found that it was pretty broken that they could pierce through resistances and were affected by damage up and crit buffs. So they were just completely busted. So for episode Aigis, I went in with Heartless, the Merciless equivalent, which is just thematically appropriate, which I thought was a cute little touch. So this difficulty was a good challenge for me, and it felt about more or less where the original difficulty was, albeit if you were a bit underleveled. The dungeons are a slog, and the floor layouts there are only so many sets, and this was not the case in the base game. So you're going to be seeing the same floor sets over and over and over again in a way that you didn't in the base game. There are just a limited number of floor sets. So it feels like going back to play the original Persona 3. And again, I think that's going to be a reason why people bounce off. You're also missing the social sim elements that would normally break up the dungeon crawling. You're just going floor to floor to floor to floor. And there's not really a break. And for me, I would oftentimes just avoid combat to get through floors quickly. I feel like if I leveled more, I would probably have had an easier time, but that would have prolonged shit in a way that I didn't need to. And I was enjoying the difficulty as it stood. Like, I felt like gear, my affinities, buffs and debuffs were all mattering. And most importantly, theurgies were kept in check. So we're on hard. Like I said, it was easy to turtle up, wait for theurgies, blast, and win. I could not do that on Heartless. So while they still had the same effects, where they could pierce affinities, they can't miss, they were affected by buffs, they dealt just far less damage. So they were not just instant win. So I actually had to make the choice a lot of the time between the high damage theurgies and the support theurgies, because characters get two. And so this became a tough choice in situations. Should I try to get in as much damage here, or will having everybody with a magic charge actually deal more damage? Like, should I have Aigis attack here, or use Cadenza to get a heal off, and that would then save Yukari's turn to debuff a boss instead of having her heal? So now I felt like I was actually thinking rather than just damage, damage, damage the whole way. I was able to strategize in a way that I felt that the base game let me down. So like if I played Reload in another playthrough, I would go Merciless without a doubt, and maybe even seek like a modded difficulty. But that's just me. I have a sickness. You know, people can play on whatever difficulty they have fun with, you know. So it took me almost exactly 30 hours at this difficulty, and that's with a few game overs, and that's mostly attributed to getting ambushed, because the ambushed attacks for Aigis, where you have to actually aim because she's ranged, and like if you're not on target and you miss, you're gonna get whacked. It's just how it goes. And then I had a few boss deaths. So like I was dying, you know? Like that shows that like I did not die in the base game on hard. You know, I assume that lower difficulties would be faster than my 30 hours. I have issues with how this expansion is named. Bear with me, please. So, the last time I discussed Persona 3 Reload, I talked about the importance of capping off a definitive version of Persona with The Answer, which was the original name for this piece of DLC. And I went into the reasons why the base game is called The Journey, and the epilogue is called The Answer. I won't repeat the full thing here. If you have the stomach for a 3-hour podcast, please check that out. I do recognize how goofy it would have been if this expansion was actually called Persona 3 Reload Episode Aigis The Answer, which I believe was the title they were going to use like around the time that it was announced. Which is why I propose that it should have just been called The Answer in the first place. Yes, Aigis is the main character, and also the player character of the expansion. Yes, the story revolves around her. But the script is identical to the FES version, aside from the new Link episodes that didn't previously exist. The narrative from the plot standpoint is about the cast finding out the answer to what happened at the end of the base game, as they're stuck in this kind of purgatory time loop-ish thing, and they're unable to move on until they find out this answer. And so, thematically, and literally in the script, this is really driven home. You can't miss it. It's about finding the answer to life and what that means for Aigis, and to a lesser extent, the rest of the party. But you don't get that if you don't have that dichotomy spelled out in plain text, as silly and as stubborn as it may seem. There's a monologue a character gives at the very end of the DLC, after you've been through all kinds of shit, 25 plus hours of dungeon crawling, that ties all this up. And if it's your first time playing, all of these thematic keys just sort of slide into place. It actually brought tears to my eyes the way it fits so nicely. Like not the emotional bit, just the bit where I'm like, yes. This just works. This is beautifully laid out. And I was like, oh, yes. It's just beautifully done, is the thing. I don't know. I just love this shit. Okay? Like, it's easy to meme on shit from the game, like the Arcana is the means by which all is revealed. And I did it last time too, you know? But there's a purpose to why that line gets spammed during that portion of the game. It's the Persona 3 equivalent of take your time. It needs to be repeated because a lot of motherfuckers don't seem to get it. They'll repeat the meme, but they don't get it. They'll say it. They'll say the Arcana is the means by which all is revealed, but they don't think about what they're saying. This is a journey. This is a reading. The cards are being read to you. This is what they mean. You've experienced all of them. What do you take away from them? You've seen these symbols throughout your journey. You're at the summit of actualization. Now, what's your answer? Anyway, that's why you call this expansion the answer. Not episode Aigis. That's my rant. Thank you for coming. I could do short episodes. I can do it. I just have to be highly caffeinated, apparently. Next time, depending on how quickly I can finish the notes, we're either going to be discussing Metaphor Refantasio, just to keep the Atlus train rolling, or I'm going to have a kind of variety show about some of the older RPGs I played in the last year or so in the background that I haven't really gotten to talk about. Just because of all of 2024's press turn madness. But yeah, with the amount of research that I'm in the middle of, it's probably going to be the latter if I want to get something out. Because right now I'm in the middle of a book on Hermetic philosophy. So, where else are you going to get that kind of insanity? Check out the Den Roadshow, a podcast all about the decaying web and our increasingly tiny space in it. That's fun. I don't remember when I wrote that, but it's in the notes, so I'm going to read it. Email in anything like your thoughts on SMT Vengeance. Or maybe what other RPGs you want me to play and discuss. Podcast at denandroad.media. And also check out the website, denandroad.media. Sometimes I spill my guts there. Sometimes I write reviews of things. Sometimes I don't post anything at all. Check out the YouTube. Sometimes I do clips. I haven't done those in a long time. Yeah. That's it for me. Quick one. Breezy one. 2025. Back in action. Alright. See you in the next one.
Behold my demon!